Welcome back, everyone, to the American Tradition. My name is Jeremy Mack. I am a pastor, I'm a farmer, I'm a localist, and I'm an essayist. And this is the final video in our instability series. So this is going to be the cure. So we've talked about our moral instability, we've talked about our economic instability, we've talked about our political instability and how they're all built on one another. So there's the moral leads to the economic, and the economic leads to the political. Just a little note on how the economics and politics are related, so and why economic instability does lead to political instability. So one of the reasons you even have the political, or I would even say the chief reason you have the political, is the economic. So you and I have to live together. I have to make a living, you have to make a living. If I provide a service to you, or if I sell you a piece of land, or you sell me a piece of land, what's to keep you from taking it back? Or what's to keep you from taking my money and not providing the service, or me from taking your money and not providing the service, or me from selling you land and then taking the land back, right? So the economic, that's what gives rise to the political, okay? Because we have to have a way to enforce our agreements. All right. And so the judiciary rises from that, the legislature rises from that, like, okay, how much land can you sell? Or, how do you go about land sales? I mean, all that kind of stuff, those applications of moral law, that's what the legislature does. They write laws that are in keeping with the law of God, or they should write laws that are in keeping with the law of God. And then those law, like don't steal, for instance. All right. But that gives also rise to a bunch of positive laws too. So if you're not supposed to steal, that means people have a right to private property. You can't steal what someone else doesn't own. So there has to be, by necessity, a positive right of property ownership in order to have a prohibition against theft. You understand? And so that's the way that these things come about. It's our economic lives together, our communal lives together, that give rise to the need for the political. And they must be based on just laws. If they're not based on just laws, if people are advantaged, the government picks winners and losers, which is a lot of the problem. Again, that's why the root of a lot of this is from, too large of a government that was built because people lost control of their passions and desires. And they believed that the government was all powerful and capable of doing any number of things, from saving climate to creating a college system that can be a good quality system that you don't have to pay for. So these are all things, our passions, our desires, we've lost control of them. This is why we relate this to the moral, and we no longer recognize the distinction between necessity and luxury. And that's led to debt and the economic problems that come with it, okay? And the economics problems that came with it have now created a bifurcated political system where we're pitted against each other, two parties. No matter where you fall on the spectrum, if you're a country club Republican to a hardcore libertarian, you're on the right. If you're you believe the government should do a few social welfare things, all the way to hardcore cultural Marxists that would redistribute things according to race or class. All right, so but you're pitted against each other. And no matter where you fall in degree on either side, the right or the left, you're all in one essential party. And you essentially have two Americas now who have a belief in how you solve the problems. So, okay, so what we have is a fundamental disagreement morally about what is good. So we must agree about what is good before we can begin to solve any of the problems. I'll take a drink because I'm about to say something super controversial. Culture, the word culture, the first 4 letters, cult, C-U-L-T. We think of cult, we think of, some brainwashing outfit. But the word cult is really just Latin for the word religion. So culture is that which arises from the religion of the people, no matter where you are. If you're in a Buddhist country, the culture that arises there is Buddhist. If you're in a Muslim country, the culture that arises there is Muslim. If you're in a Christian culture country, then the culture that arises from it is Christian. And if you're in a secular country, the culture that arises from it is Christian. You thought I was going to say atheism, but that's not true. Secularization, again, as Leo Strauss basically put it, which is, I think, a great definition, is those things which were Christian that people want to maintain after the loss of faith or the atrophy of faith. And I believe fundamentally that the Enlightenment project has failed, and that we now can clearly see that there is no way forward based on either natural law or based on the emotional makeup of people or based on the radical will of human beings. That those are all self-refuting concepts, and that essentially the Enlightenment project has failed. And what America is suffering right now is the malady that was introduced fundamentally through the Enlightenment, where it tried to create culture, specifically a culture that had all the same values as the Christian culture produced without Christianity. I think that's failed. I think it's a huge mistake by the founding fathers as well to placate these deists and these early secularists, these Enlightenment thinkers, that we should never have placated them at all. And that's so fundamentally, I believe we must agree on what is good. And if we don't agree on what is good, we can never have culture, true culture. You'll only have a secular culture that tries to ape what true belief actually should bring forward. So all of the art and the music and the morality and what you think about marriage and what you think about men and what you think about women, what you think about children, what you think about life, what you think about property, all these things arise from the religion of the people. In our case, as heirs of Western civilization, that is Christianity. And there is no way to maintain the American tradition as it was founded without Christianity. So I think we should make an amendment to the US Constitution that establishes small o, Orthodox Christianity, a Nicene Christianity, all right, that we should establish a small o, Orthodox Christianity, as the religion of our land explicitly, and recognize Jesus Christ as our King. If we cannot agree on what is good, what is moral, then we cannot agree on what is just, which brings me to my next point. After we have an amendment that makes Christianity, small o, Orthodox Christianity, the religion of our land, and Jesus Christ, the King of our land, then we can move forward to begin to ask, okay, what is the good? And then we can agree on what is just. If the Enlightenment project has failed, and I think you can clearly say that it has failed, then how do we make just laws? How do we make just laws? I mean, truly, we have come to a point where we cannot make just laws. They are murdering children the day before they're born in some states in this union. I say really through tears. And some cities in this nation lit up pink towers to celebrate a woman's right to kill her child up to the day of birth. And that child, no matter what you think about abortion, was a viable, separate human body in its butchery. We do not agree on what is good, so we cannot make just laws. We must first agree on what is good. And then what will follow is a foundation for which we can then make just laws that encourage life and family and personal discipline. All right? And personal discipline. Because we have to have agreement on what is good. If you think theft is bad, no matter who you're stealing from, if you're stealing their private property, okay, you can never be for my next thing. So one is we need to make Christ king and form an amendment. There's actually a group called the National Reform Association that existed in the country way back in the 19th century, which have been trying to get an amendment to the US Constitution ever since then. So we do that one thing. And then we have a foundation for making just laws. That's the second thing, when we make just laws that protect life and family right? And personal discipline, where we encourage families to care for one another. We go back to a local rule. All right, here's the third thing. All right, we must establish a currency that's based on a hard asset that the government cannot just print at will and erode the savings and erode the property of her citizens. All right, we have to have a type of money that cannot be printed at will by the state, because deficit spending is spending the wages of other people, and that's unjust. And we've already established that under Christ we should have just laws. It's unjust to steal from others, and if you're spending other people's wages, then you're essentially stealing from them. It's just a form of theft. All right, so we have to break the back of an economic system that's based on debt and theft. All right, I knew these are radical, right? Go back to that barbarous relic of gold-backed money. All right, here's the fourth thing we need to do. We need to encourage reasonable self-sufficiency. Humans live in community. It's not reasonable to expect every family to like grow their own food and do all those types of things. If you want a homestead, that's fine with me. I don't really care for that. But that's an unreasonable self-sufficiency. But we're talking about reasonable self-sufficiency. We're talking about being able to be an adult and care for your own needs, and do so by trading your labor with others for money, to which you then buy goods and services for yourself. So we need to go back to a reasonable self-sufficiency. And that we consume in the US largely what we produce in the US. I'm going to do a video in the future where I'm going to go back and look at Adam Smith's work on this subject, The Wealth of Nations, and where he talks about the invisible hand. He actually means not international free trade, as you might think, but in that book, he's actually talking about free trade among individuals in the country, tax-free trade, regulation-free trade in the country. And that would be the invisible hand that increased wealth in that nation. So we should consume mainly what we produce, and we should seek to export products rather than mainly import products. So one of the things about being a consumerized society means we consume, we import a lot. So there's huge trade deficits. And the United States doesn't make as much as they used to. We're not as much of a producer nation. We're a service-oriented nation. So we produce services, especially financial services, but also restaurants and things like that. And if you work for a restaurant, I'm in no way downgrading what you do. I'm just saying that it truly doesn't produce an asset. It doesn't produce a capital good at all. It only produces something that can be consumed. Retail is the same way. It's just consumerized ideas. And so a lot of our economy in the US is not based on production. It's based on consumption. And we must reverse that. We must make ourselves based on production again. We must stop running trade deficits as well as spending deficits. Deficits are just another word for debt, and debt is using the labor of others. If you go to Baltimore, if you go to any of these small towns in Ohio, if you go to Pennsylvania, and there's places that used to be steel towns, that were industrial towns, that were ship yards and wharfs that were there to take the goods that were made in the U.S. and ship them out. And you had productive infrastructures all over the United States because we had a solid understanding of what it means to be a producing country, what it means to be a country that has reasonable self-sufficiency. We're using electronic goods from China in our weaponry in the U.S. military. I mean, how dense can you be to do that? A lot of the problems that we have come from the use of other people's goods in our products and services, and especially in our products that we should be making in the US and that we should be consuming in the US. And if point 3 is kept, where we have a currency that maintains its value, one of the things that was true of the US all the way through World War II was that we had a strong currency, not a weak currency. All right, not a weak currency, but a strong currency. And the reason that was so foundational was that we could buy our own goods. We could produce a high quality good, we could pay a high quality wage, and we could buy what we produced. So the US was largely a country that could buy what it produced, and it exported its excesses. And so that is what we should return to. We should return to a reasonable self-sufficiency as individuals, as families, as cities, as states, and as a federal organization. Okay. If we do not do that, we will maintain ourselves as consumers. And eventually, you know, let me just point out something, and this will sound maybe a little off to some of you. But let's say, okay, I live in Tennessee. Um, Tennessee, you'd think because we're southern and a lot of open land, we might have a huge agricultural, impact. Okay, we make some agriculture. We grow agriculture. We do export some agriculture to other states and even other nations. Are you aware that 90% of carrots are grown in California? Like 90% of celery is grown in California. Like so much of our lettuce and greens and things like that are also grown in California. And that California grows also, produces a ton of dairy. A lot of people don't know how agricultural really a state like California is. Well, let's say this bifurcation of society eventually breaks the United States up into various smaller unions, which I think is as likely to happen as anything. Once something gets too big and too wieldy, you got to start breaking it down into smaller pieces that can be governed. California is the fifth largest economy in the world. It's larger than Canada's economy. The whole nation of Canada, their economy is smaller than California's economy. Think about that. That's one state of our 50 states. They have an economy larger than our northern neighbor. That's huge. Well, what if the union sort of ends up dissolving into smaller pieces, and we're in conflict? Maybe not war conflict, but we just don't like each other very much, and we decide that we're not, we're not gonna trade very well together, or interstate shipping and commerce gets in some way bogged down by having to go through multiple regions. There could be a time where there's real disagreement between the regions in the U.S. I mean, there's vast differences between the South, Midwest, and Northeast and Northwest. And then states like California and Texas, who are large enough to have their own really nations. They have huge land masses. They have natural resources. They have ocean ports. I mean, these are all, as hard as it is for us to really comprehend, these are real possibilities. Okay, a state like Tennessee that doesn't ask itself like hard questions like right now, like why are we not reasonably self-sufficient? We have the open land, we have the people, we even have the skills to do these things. Like why are we not producing more things internally, agriculturally, as a hedge against difficulty in the future? So, I mean, the time to think about those things is now, not when the storm is brewing over you, right? When you're having to make changes on a drop of a dime. There's millions of people live in Tennessee. You can't turn these big ships in really, really quickly. You need to be thinking like this now, but families need to be thinking like this. You need to be thinking about reasonable self-sufficiency. And I'm in no way saying homestead, everybody should be homesteaders. If you want to live in the suburbs, you want to live in a city, that's your business. But you should be reasonably self-sufficient. You should not be dependent on other entities, government entities, state entities, city-oriented entities, because those are the first kind of things that are gonna go away if we have a serious economic problem. The poor are always those who will suffer the most. And so I would encourage that families begin to think about working together and sharing vision and sharing resources as a habit for the future. Reasonable self-sufficiency. Finally, and this is one that's really important for us as a nation, finally, it means we must return to a defensive nation as a posture. All right, that's called just war theory. So instead of having active offensive war, we should have only active defensive war. So Pearl Harbor's anniversary was the other day. We entered World War II after being attacked by the Japanese. So we should go back to a position of we will only go to war if we're attacked. And as soon as that war is over, it's not our business to rebuild a nation who attacked us. It's their business to rebuild it, and the nation and their nearest neighbors. And we bring all our troops home. And we should spend our time defending our nation, but also defending our borders too. And this is, I'm all for immigration in an orderly fashion. You have to have a means by which you bring people into the United States and assimilate them into the U.S. as Americans. You can't have an open border policy that way, because you can't have a lot of people in your country that don't have allegiance to your nation. If they don't love the land and the people and the way of life and the founding of that nation, like the all that it means to become that, then you don't actually have a nation that's capable of producing and guarding a national inheritance and a national treasure. People have to be thinking the same and working in the same vein. And so much of what we have in the US are economic immigrants. And if the economics dried up here, and I saw this in 2007, by the way, I was in the construction industry for many years. And so I saw this in 2007. When economics dried up here, the labor that came into the United States illegally went back to where they first came from. They didn't have allegiance to the United States. They were only here for economic reasons. Those are mercenaries, all right? So we call those mercenaries. Mercenaries are people who fight wars for money, okay? But you can also have economic mercenaries of different kinds. So you never want just a land full of mercenaries, of people who are only there for the money. You have to have a love for that place, a love for those people, a love for that nation, because money cannot replace love. These things cannot be replaced, like love cannot be replaced with other things. We must have a true brotherhood, a true love of one another. So we must agree on what is good. We must have the same foundation of what is good in order to make just laws that we can all agree to. We must have a sound currency that can't be eroded by spending and by the government. We must return to that'll help us return to a savings-based economy. Returning to a savings-based economy then helps us return to a reasonable self-sufficiency, whatever that means for you, all right? And then a reasonable self-sufficiency and a national treasure and national heritage then begins to be built up. And so then we should take a defensive posture. Friends, we should be good friends with all and alliances with none. That's what George Washington encouraged us, to not entangle ourselves in the affairs of other nations. Sometimes I'll do a video on his final address to the American people, where he tells us to have goodwill toward all and alliances with none, and not to get ourselves involved in the foreign affairs, in affairs of other nations, and entangling business like that. So we must return to a just guarding of the treasure of our national inheritance, and having goodwill toward all, a neutrality in the world, one that is beneficial for the world, but one that's also, committed to guarding those things for our children and for our children's children. We must return to an American tradition. These things that I just gave you, with the exception of the first point, which is making Christianity a small orthodox. That's not a part of the official governmental tradition, but I think it's an error that we fell into, and we need to rectify that. But Christianity is part of the American tradition. The Christian faith built the American culture, built the American civilization, built what you have here. Men apply it imperfectly, but the U.S. has progressed in its application of laws of equality and things like that, because Christianity said there's no longer male nor female, circumcision or uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and in all. It was our equality before God that produced an equality, that produced seeing each other as equally human. And while those laws may not have been applied originally equally, they have progressed in their application that way. And they progressed in their application long before we came into the modern world. It is a folly to believe that we can exist as a culture that's based on anything that God approves of without the Christian faith at our foundation. So these are the American traditions, and Christianity is part of the American tradition. American tradition is part of the broader Western tradition, and the broader Western tradition set the world free and has produced more liberty, and has produced less poverty, and has lifted millions and millions around the world out of the muck and mire of a culture that was based on a false God, that was not true and not real, and certainly not good. And that is what is at stake right now in the United States. We must defend the American tradition. And these are the things that we must recover if we are to meaningfully renew ourselves as a nation around our original core traditions. To me, tradition's not a bad word. It used to be, but no, it's not. It's not. There are things that are handed down from us, from our parents. And our parents, our forefathers, are not knuckle dragging, mouth breathing, Neanderthals. They truly knew what they were doing. And when they built to last. Let me tell you a story to close. When I was a small child, about 6, my brother got an electric motorcycle. I was too big weight-wise for the motorcycle. It was this battery thing. We didn't have them when I was young. When I was my brother's age, he was 3 years younger than me. I was so jealous of that motorcycle. One day, I said, John, hey, I think this thing has a problem with it. Let's take it into the room. And then I smuggled my dad's tools in and I tore that thing down into the basic component parts. My father came home, spanked me, as was the as what people did in the 70s when I was young. And then he spent a week trying to put that little electronic motorcycle back together. And he never was able to do it. They put it into a bag and set it out by the road. It was trash. Here's the point. A 6-year-old can take apart what a 30-year-old man can not put back together. And I'm afraid that's a good analogy for what's going on right now. We are taking things apart in this nation without truly understanding how it was originally put together. And we, in our arrogance, think that we're building something merely by tearing something apart. But we're going to get it into its base component parts. And I'm afraid we may be at that point now, where we're going to tear it to its base component parts and not be able to put it back together and lose the wonder and the beauty and really exceptional thing that came into existence in the United States, where men were free and had liberty, and they had freedom of association and movement, and they had good money and currency, and they could trade their goods and services with one another, and they could worship God in liberty. And you may say, oh, but your first point is not to worship God. When they made freedom of religion, they never imagined that religion would mean any of the world religions. What they said religion in the original meaning of that was you shall not establish Presbyterianism or Congregationalism or independency or Catholicism as an established religion in the US, because they just left those things in Europe. That's what they meant by that. That's what the term meant. And we need to be very careful, because what is pictured behind me is the fall of the Roman Empire. It fell, and it fell because it became morally unstable, it became economically unstable, and it became politically unstable. And then the barbarians came for it. And they liked Rome, and they liked the comfort of Rome, and they liked the roads of Rome. And they tried to live in their houses and do the things that Romans did, but it just didn't work because they didn't have the same foundation. And Rome fell into disrepair under a group of people who did not understand how Rome was built in the first place. The barbarians are now at the gates, and we should be defending these American traditions. God bless.